This conversation in the United States where Christians or cultural Christians understand the balance between liberty and responsibility seems to have a major disconnect. In the Declaration of Independence in the United States, it says all men are created equal. They're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's often quoted here, but it seems that liberty is misunderstood these days when used in the same sentence as not getting vaccinated, because one's liberty doesn't include taking away another's liberty. Endangering the lives or impairing others' ability to pursue happiness due to causing them impairment, death, or verifiable long-term impacts of COVID is not liberty. And there's an extremist political focus on religious liberty that doesn't make any connection to anything actually scriptural in the Christian context. And our liberties have limits when they stomp on the rights of others. It's not selfishness. It comes with responsibility that's inherent to the social contract and the idea that the Republic was founded on. The social contract is a voluntary response in democracy and how democracy is built. So I want to be clear that I'm talking about following the data on the voluntary choice to be vaccinated in order to get through this pandemic. I'm not suggesting mandatory vaccinations. And it seems like from a Christian standpoint that this should be clear. The Bible says, be careful not that your freedom doesn't cause another to stumble in 1 Corinthians 8:9. There's so many scriptures that are relevant, clearly relevant to loving your neighbor, that we wouldn't even have time to go through all of them. But there's some interesting points I wanted to note. For example, the first recorded quarantine and social distancing was actually biblical in Leviticus. We're also seeing something very different than the first church in the 2nd and 3rd century than we do in the US church today. Rodney Stark writes about in The Rise of Christianity how one of the things that actually made Christianity grow was the early church's response to a plague that was going on during that time. And that we were the first to go in and being willing to show care and love to people who were sick. And because we built social networks and showed community through that, that was one of the very things that caused Christianity to grow. And when other people's families and social networks abandoned them, the early church was the first to go into the plague to care for others. Also, Martin Luther wrote, there was a plague during the time of the Reformation. He said, and I think this is really interesting, therefore I should ask God mercifully to protect us. I shall fumigate, help purify the air, administer medicine, and take it. I shall avoid places and persons where my presence is not needed in order to not become contaminated and thus perchance infect and pollute others, and so cause their death as a result of my negligence. See, this is such a God-fearing faith because it's neither brash nor foolhardy and does not tempt God. So that's what he wrote in a letter to somebody else as a Christian response to a plague. Part of the job of the state is public health. It's to protect life and health. In contrast, what does the anti-vaccine Christian seek is really the liberty to risk the lives of others. Christianity in this case means I want to do what I want to do. And there is a valid concern about the protection of religious liberty in some cases, but its overuse has allowed for what a writer, David French, called a sense of religious entitlement that is way more emphasized than Christian responsibility nowadays. If we pursue a religious liberty that stomps on others, Christians are at risk of doing the very thing that they fear, which is diminishing their rights to religious liberty in the eyes of the culture. Things as simple as wearing a mask or getting a vaccine seem like a fundamental way to love others, a fundamental way to love our neighbor. Yet some white evangelicals are part of spreading a plague instead of being the ones to prevent it, which is just a stark picture of some of the insanity of our times. and unfortunately continuing to wear away evangelicals' moral status. However, presenting reasonable and fact-based arguments doesn't seem to change people's minds. I think the only thing that is going to change people's minds from vaccine conspiracy theorists is a heart change. It seems that there are many who are extremists who use the words religious liberty in the United States, have a broken moral compass and hardened hearts that are difficult to penetrate with arguments based on rationalism or love of neighbor. And the only comparable mass delusion that I've actually seen that compares to this is the Stop the Steal movement that happened on January 6th. Christians are increasingly pandered to by populist politicians with a fear-based message. And unfortunately, Christians in America are full of fear. So both of these examples have to do with fear of being controlled and at the mercy of people who they think want to destroy them, which has allowed people in the church to fall prey to lies like the follower of the Pharisees in Jesus' time. However, I do want to acknowledge that the establishment has had some hand in fostering this fear as well. We have an unbelievable healthcare crisis in the United States, and politicians could fix this system and they haven't. Pharmaceutical companies are allowed to price gouge people. People are scared of pharmaceutical companies. I hear just tragic stories about the lack of healthcare all the time, and there's social problem after social problem that can be pointed to as based on some of our healthcare issues in the United States. So I too have been vulnerable to wanting to buy the latest health supplement that's going to change my life. And in this way, people tend to believe alternative health practitioners who foster this fear of establishment medicine, and that doesn't help either. So I think that I want to say that the overwhelming data obviously supports vaccines, and that in this case, we really have to think about what is going to end this plague and what does the data show. We live in a pluralistic society, and because of that, neither the left or the right can tell each other exactly how to think. And as I said, we can't tell people they have to get the shot. We can't mandate it legally. But both sides need to demonstrate a willingness to respect the liberty of the other without stomping on their life, to right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.